Have you ever wanted your kicks to be bigger, fatter, rounder, have more impact, or any of the above? Well, in this video, I'm going to show you 2 steps that you can take right now to get killer kick drum production. Now, getting straight into it, the first thing that I'll say with kick drums is that it is always beneficial to start with a good sample. Now, that might sound like common sense, but it really does help for you to have a great kick drum sample in your song, whether that's been recorded by you or it is a sample that you have found or downloaded from a splice or something like that. It doesn't matter as long as the sample really suits the song. What suits your song? Well, if you listen to a lot of music, which I presume you do, when you're cycling through sample libraries or your own sample library and trying to find a kick that suits your song or your mix, the more music you listen to, the easier it's going to be for your ear to pick out what suits a specific genre of music or what might suit a different genre of music. You might borrow from different styles. But the only way to get there is to listen to a lot of music, expose yourself to a lot of music, develop your taste, and then experiment as you're producing. Once you have your kick in the mix, it's important to then go through the steps to make sure it does really fit. That way, you'll definitely guarantee yourself killer kick drum production. So some pointers to get you there. First of all, how does your kick sit with the rest of your drums? How does it sit with the bass? And then, of course, don't just listen to that kick drum in isolation, because it does inform the rest of your mix. And there's a bit more coming on this later. Now, I want to play you back a section of my mix so I can dig into these pointers a little bit more. The first thing I'm going to do is just turn off the 2 plugins that I have on my kick drum. I'll be coming back to those in just a second. So when I play this back, listen out for the kick drum, the bass, the piano, and the higher percussion elements in the mix, and just see how they all relate to each other. Now that kick drum is fine. I have that in the mix for a reason. But going back to those pointers, how does it sit with the rest of my drums? I actually feel that the attack of the kick is starting to creep into my high-end elements. It's affecting the snare, and it's also going to affect the music because it's in that 2 to 6K range where I want other parts of the mix to shine. Then how does it sit with the bass and the rest of the music? Well, actually, it's okay in this instance because I have a sidechain running between the kick and the bass. That means that whenever the kick hits, the bass is ducked. And this is actually an 808 bass. So there is a punchy sound to this 808 as well. This OR compressor here is the sidechain. Now, I'm not going to get fully into sidechain compression in this video. I've done a whole video on that you can check out on my channel that goes into extreme detail. But the main concept is that when the kick hits, it ducks the bass. And that ties into how the kick relates to the other elements in the mix. In this situation, I want the piano chords that you hear to be heard first. They come in on the first beat of the bar. So I want those to be the first thing that you hear. If I've got a kick drum and an 808 hitting at the same time, they're all competing for space. So I want the piano to hit. I want the kick drum to hit on the first beat of the bar as well. But I don't want it to have a super present attack. And then when the kick hits, I don't want the attack of the bass hitting at the same time. I want a nice round kick sound resonating through that 808 bass. And this is all part of great kick drum production, making sure that all of the elements actually serve the song. So now that you know you have a great kick sample in your mix and it will play nice with the rest of the elements in your mix, here's how to really take it to that next level. Here's how to get those 2 steps to killer kick drum production. They're not complicated and you do not need any sort of special plugins to do this. I'm going to show you exactly what I did in this mix to further enhance my kick drum sound. Now, the grand reveal for step 1, what is the all-important tool or plugin I used? Well, it is an EQ. Not much of a grand reveal. You do not need to use the exact EQ plugin that I use. You don't need to use any of the same plugins that I use. It is not a prerequisite that you have the FabFilter Pro Q. Any EQ will do for this purpose. All right, so here is what this EQ is doing in the mix. I'm going to play it with the EQ on first. taking the EQ out. EQ back in. By using this EQ, it's rounding out that kick drum sound. Nothing wild is going on here. It just sits a lot better with the rest of the elements of the mix. And I know that you have a different kick drum and you have a different mix, so I'm going to explain exactly how to do it in your mix and in your mixes and any song that you work on. The best way I can do that is to explain how the kick behaves in different frequency ranges. So down here is subsonic, 0 to 20 hertz. We don't really use anything in here for music masters. You feel it rather than hear it. It's used in cinemas a lot to give you that big theatrical, dramatic feel. So pretty much as standard, I've got a roll off from 20 hertz. Here it's 25. You can play around with this and bring it up a little higher or lower and hear what actually suits your mix. Then you got the low bass between 20 and 60 hertz. So in around here. The kick and bass fundamentals are in this range. And a fundamental is the lowest audible frequency of a sound. It helps to give it its pitch. If your kick is sounding good straight out of the box, it's going to have power, thickness, fatness, all those really good terms. If it's got too much, it's going to sound boomy or muddy. And if there's not enough going on, it's going to sound really thin and weak. All right, next section, mid bass, 60 to 100 hertz. Here you get a much better idea of tonality. And we're still talking about in similar terms of what we heard before. Power, thickness, all that sort of stuff. Those terms still apply here. You get a lot of kick, bass, and piano fundamentals heard here. Very relevant to this mix because you got all three in it. That's why we don't want them all competing for the same space. Now you notice that between 20 and 100 hertz, there are no boosts. Well, I've got plus 0.05 at 86 because I obviously messed around with it and then pulled it back at some stage and it'll pull it back to exactly 0. But there are no real cuts or boosts in this range, which would sort of indicate that in that range, my kick sample is perfect for this mix and it must play nice with the bass. Now, if I just leave this EQ in the background, go down to my bass, just to show you this, I have a cut in the bass at 49 of 4 dB. So as well as a sidechain, when the kick hits, it ducks the attack of the bass. The sustain of the bass is also being reduced in this frequency range to help round out the kick and the bass together so that those frequencies play nice and they don't mask each other. I'm not saying duck 50 hertz on every bass that you get, but just remember that something has to win, especially in the low end because it takes up so much headroom. Now, if I solo the kick and the bass, bypass these two EQs, just play it back. And then the EQ in. You can hear the kick first, then the bass just rounds out the sound without. Now it's overpowering. Back in. Nice round sound. So you get the idea of what we're trying to do here. By balancing the sound of the kick and the bass even more, that kick actually becomes fatter and has its own space in the mix. Next, you got upper bass, which is between 100 and 250 hertz. Good terms here are color, warmth, and body. Bad term associated with this range is mud. You'll start to hear people describe this range as muddy if there's way too much 100 to 250 hertz. There are no boosts in this range, but you do see the start of the upward curve because there is a boost at 385, and that brings me to the next frequency range. Here you got the low mids between 250 hertz to 2K. There might be some fundamentals in this area, but it's mostly low order harmonics. And harmonics are a multiple of the fundamentals. So if we say the fundamental frequency of this kick drum was 100 hertz. It's not. Let's use it as an example. Then the harmonics will be at 200, 300, 400, 500, and so on. The fundamental gives a sound its pitch, and harmonics give it its color. Now, a boost of 385, to a lot of people looking at a kick drum, they'd say that's where you take the mud out of the kick. I used to do that all the time. I used to be taking 300 to 350 out of pretty much every kick drum that came in, and that's really pointless because in this situation, I actually needed more of it. I wanted to add more warmth and body to my kick drum. So without it, it's just not there. The most important point that I want to get across here is that you just don't need to automatically go in and assume that you need to cut in this range. Sometimes you might actually need to boost. Here's a perfect example of that. All right, the high mids are from 2K to 6K. And as you can see here, there's quite a bit of a roll off. Our ears react a lot to these frequencies because of the equal loudness contours. Good terms associated with this range are presence, clarity, intelligibility, edge, and loudness. Too much, you'll get harsh tones. In the case of this kick drum, there weren't harsh tones. It's just that for the style and the taste of what I'm going for, the attack of the kick drum is too much. So there's too much edge, there's too much presence. So I decided to roll off quite a bit, almost 8 dB from 2K and above. So if I take this out, this is the kick sound, and bring it back in, you just get less of the click, less of the beater sound. And that's back in. This is how it is in the mix. Again, quite subtle in isolation, but makes a big impact on the mix. You're going to hear that in a second, so sit tight. Now, kick drum high end, 6K to 20K. There's not a lot of energy left in the 6K to 20K range, but around 6K, you may still get some of the beater, even up to 10K. And removing that is going to remove a lot of the attack. As you think of the beater actually hitting the drum, that's where all the attack comes from. So in the context of the mix, once more, here's what the kick sounds like without EQ. And with EQ. All right, relatively subtle, but doing exactly what I want in the mix. And it's only when you get to the next step of killer kick drum production that it really comes together and you start to hear the impact that it has. And the next step of killer kick drum production is compression. The next thing that I have on my kick drum track is a compressor. In this situation, it is an 1176 compressor. The reason why I have an 1176 compressor on here is because it has variable attack and release times that you can adjust that are quite fast or very slow if you want, but you can have a fast attack and fast release, and that's exactly what I want in this instance. A fast attack, definitely. Once again, you do not need this exact plugin. You don't need the CLA 76. There's a Bomb Factory plugin that comes with Pro Tools, or grab any sort of free 1176 or one that you want to buy. Whatever it is, you do not need the exact one that I have in front of you right now. All right, so I mentioned attack and release. Let's talk about what attack and release are in terms of compression once more. Attack is how quickly we want the compressor to act. A longer attack time means we hear more of the instrument's transients and natural attack. We might not always want to clamp down quickly on those, but in this situation, I do. So I have a very fast attack time on the compressor. 7 here is the fastest it goes on the 1176. 1 is the slowest. It's the opposite of what you might think. So 7 fastest, 1 slowest. That means that as soon as the compressor starts acting, it's going to clamp straight down on the transient, the attack of that kick drum. Then release is how quickly or how slowly we want the compressor to stop acting on the audio. A short release time will give us more compression because the compressor can kick in again quickly, and that increases the perceived loudness. In this situation, I've got quite a slow release time. And before I play this back, I just want to explain how the attack and release time are working together. So the attack, as I mentioned, clamping down on the transient. The release, it's not releasing fast, so there's less compression happening and less perceived loudness. Just trying to round out the sound to give quite a fat low end that sits in the right place in the mix. All right, so here's the mix without this compressor in. compression. Without. Back in. Now, as you can see, that needle is hitting between -7 and -10, which indicates quite a lot of gain reduction. Once again, we don't mix with our eyes, we mix with our ears. And to my ears, when I am using that compressor, I hear a much rounder, fatter low end. It's no longer as subtle as just the EQ. The EQ and the compression are working together to allow that kick and bass to gel just after the piano hits. So the three elements all have their own space in the mix. Not only that, by reducing the attack on the kick drum, by using that filter from 2K up, I'm clearing space in the mix for those high-end parts in the drums. They have a lot more space, and it does not compromise the kick whatsoever. Here is the mix without those two plugins. Two plugins in. Taking those plugins out. Back in. Now remember, this video is all about crafting the sound that you want. It's not about getting the sounds that I have in this mix or anything like that. It's about showing you how you can get killer kick drum production, take those samples to the very next level in two really, really simple steps. People very often get frustrated with the samples that they bring in because they're not quite perfect, but you can actually adjust them to exactly how you want them to sound in the mix by knowing the theory. It's not about having the fanciest plugins. It's just about using the theory, knowing why you're doing this, and then going about it to craft the sound that you want. Now, you're welcome to go and copy the settings that I have here, but just remember that they're unlikely to suit your mix because the sounds are going to be different. But you now understand the theory. You understand the various frequency ranges and how they pertain to the kick drum. And you also understand how compression works. So you can manipulate your attack and release times to allow your kick drum to behave the way you want it in the mix. Just by doing those two things, you're already creating a new kick drum sound. You don't need to go, again, trawling through more libraries to find another kick, to start layering it up, all that sort of stuff. You already have the tools. You now have the theory, so you can adjust and tinker to your heart's content to find the exact sound that you want that suits your mix. And I got to hammer this point home one last time. Don't just listen in isolation. You can have the best kick sound in the world, and you can do all the EQ and compression. You can add fuzz and whatever else, and it'll sound great on its own and sound absolutely terrible in your mix. You might have thought at the start that some of the stuff that I was doing was quite subtle, but over time, I'm sure you heard that I started to craft the kick drum to really suit the mix. That is what this will do for you too if you serve the song and listen to your kick drum and make these decisions as part of the overall mix. All right, that's it. 2 steps to killer kick drum production. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, leave a comment down below letting me know how it helped you. And if it has helped you and you're feeling super generous, drop a like on this video. It helps the channel, it helps me make more videos for you. And if you do like what I'm saying, also make sure to hit that subscribe button. Go have fun with this and do let me know how you get on in the comments below. I will be back with another video very soon, and in the meantime, have fun making great music.